I'm going to take you step by step through making an infographic, and we're going to use the simple four-step process to plan and help us get through this workload without doing too much work, or anyway, keeping it efficient and straightforward. So our first step is to research and plan. I want to identify what I'm making and what its purpose will be. So I'm going to make a chocolate versus vanilla infographic, and I want it to make people aware of who does like chocolate and vanilla and maybe make them hungry by the time they're done looking at it. To research, I just got online and I did some browsing on some reputable sites for information on surveys that have been taken at some point about ice cream. And I found one that involved about 2,000 people, so we know it's a pretty good sampling. Then I picked the information I wanted from there and distilled it down to simple facts that would answer about 5 questions. My next step was to gather visual resources, and I used a basic image search on Google to do this, and I came up with some textures. So here are some photos of very ice creamy looking things that I could change to any color that I wanted, and I have also found what I like to call a soft background texture. We've got big textures and small textures, and texture scale is important. You'll really see why, but just know that you definitely need something that will add a little bit of texture but not a whole lot of detail. Next, I went and found some graphics that are definitely ice cream related that I wanted to maybe use to inspire some graphics on my layout. And the other thing you want to do as you're gathering visual resources is find some inspiration. There's really no need to reinvent the wheel. So what I do is I go to Google, or you can go to whatever browser you prefer, and I would type in just infographic and then click on images to get an image result. And here I'll see all sorts of infographics, but after looking at a couple dozen of these, I'll have a good idea of what trends are and even how things like fonts and colors and textures are being used. So I don't have to invent my own sort of visual language. I can use ones that have already been established. Other things you want to look for are visual associations, and that means things like a talk bubble gives an opinion, or arrows indicate direction, or chart, it maps data, things that we've seen before and we understand what they mean. So symbols, icons, these are visual associations. If you're not finding enough inspiration just by doing such a general search, type in something a little more specific. So I'm going to look for a food infographic, and that will bring me into something that is more to the point of what I'm making, and I can look at these overall items and see that they're using soft, appealing color schemes and really flat graphics. You'll notice that they don't have a lot of photos, so I think that's what I'm going to go with, and I can create right from scratch. So there's my inspiration. My next step is to establish a visual scheme, and by looking at my inspiration I've started to do that, but then I really need to go to my own file and start accumulating the fonts, the colors, and definitely the textures, and the way I want to treat my fonts will make the visual scheme. Now, I say establish a visual scheme as a step before you begin building, but you need to realize it's more of a process. You set up what you think you're going to use, but then as you build, you might refine it down or add a little bit too. It's not set in stone at this point. So I've looked around and found some really fun fonts and played with them a little bit, played with my textures a little bit, and then I looked for a color scheme, and I figured one for Neapolitan ice cream would give me something that's immediately visually relatable as ice cream, but throw in a little more color so it's not just browns and grays, so we've got something a little more appealing. When I do a color scheme for an infographic, or really any layout, you're better off if it is simple. I keep my color schemes to 5 colors. Now you'll say, oh wait, there's more circles on there. Well, really, this is a 5-point color scheme. However, frequently as you create your graphics, especially if they're flat graphics, you might find yourself needing a little more detail or even a little more dimension, and sometimes you need a slightly darker or brighter version of the color so that your type will have the contrast you need for it to be readable. I'll pop over to one of these examples that I've started building graphics for. I use my vector tools, my pen tool, my shape tools, and come in and just trace right over one of these pictures that I've found. Now you can see that I have a darker and a lighter edge here. Now I've made that because I observed the picture of this, and the way the light is falling, I can tell it's thick because it's got a bright side and then a dark side over here that shows me how thick the cookie is, and it might just look weird if I didn't include that darker side. So as I was building my pieces, I simply built one heart shape and then copied it however many times I needed for these different layers and changed the color so I had a dark side and a light side. That's why you want to have more than just, or rather you want to have maybe a darker and a lighter version that you can play with of your main 5 colors. So you can go in and pick specifically what color you want for your darker colors, but a really easy way to do it is to work with a layer that is just a regular pixel layer, make a copy of it, and then go into your curves adjustment. So I'm going to go to my image, adjustments, and curves, and this will affect the pixel layer directly. So this isn't an adjustment layer, I'm actually going to change the pixels of this layer. You can simply grab this line in the middle and drag it to the right, which will make the color darker and more intense, but it won't just add black. To make it lighter, you'd go the other direction, and that is that same hue is just lighter or darker. If you do actually want to tone it down to make it subdued, you can grab one of the dots here in the corner, and if you drag it up, it will add white. And I believe if you grab this other one and drag down, it will add black. So you can see as I do that it's slightly different than this way. If you grab in the middle, that'll make more of a saturated light or dark. And if you use the corners, you'll create a tint or a shade. Now I like to keep my colors popping, so I'm going to use the more saturated option and click OK. The last bit to getting ready to really get rolling on this is to build the layout. And the first step of that is actually grabbing a sheet of paper and a pencil and doing a little thumbnail sketch, which I did on paper, but then so you could see it, I made sort of a digital version that's a lot bigger. Now I know this is a huge mess, but I really wanted to show you you're not trying to create a masterpiece on a little piece of paper. This was drawn about 2 inches big, maybe 3. And this just gave me a chance to work out the visual balance of the different elements that I knew I would be working with. As you lay out pieces, you want to keep in mind where your reader will start reading, and usually that's the top left corner. So we've got a title up here. I would read left to right and then come down to the next line. And this one is broken up in a similar fashion to many of the infographics I came across in my searches, that think of it maybe as a comic book a little bit, that you're using these panels to break it up and guide the eye around the page. So the eye would go this way, and then this, and then this, and this. So once we get putting the pieces together, that will be more obvious.